Hello and welcome to This Really Happened, a place where unbelievable, heart-touching true stories come to life. Sometimes surprising, sometimes bittersweet, always real. Grab a drink and settle in. We're about to begin. In the cramped little room, whose walls were covered in faded yellow wallpaper with a pattern of small flowers, sat two people. A short woman with strands of grey in her hair, with features carved from stone. She had a hooked nose, resembling a bird of prey's beak, and thin lips like a blade. A heavy necklace on her chest, bouncing in time with her sharp words, like whip cracks, added a touch of crude massiveness to her appearance. "Will, surely you see that this cannot go on," the woman snapped, throwing her head back. "She has become an obstacle in our path." The man looked at his mother, and his gaze was a mix of defiance and guilt. His soft features blurred into an expression of pity. His hands hung limply, his eyes wandering anywhere but meeting his mother's. "She's my wife, Mom. How can't you understand?" The woman threw up her hands and snorted like an angry cat. "Oh, don't give me that wife nonsense. You wouldn't have strayed if you valued her, and I'm not going to clean up after her. She's a vegetable, and you heard what the doctor said. She has no more than a year left. What's the point of doing anything at all? I think she'll be perfectly fine at her grandmother's house. She'll remember her homeland, her childhood." William nodded vaguely. "Besides, she'll leave a decent inheritance after her death. That will help improve our situation. So—" William looked thoughtfully at his mother and sighed heavily. The next day, all the bags and suitcases with Hope's belongings, William's wife, were packed. Eleanor, the girl's mother-in-law, put them in the hallway, not hiding her smirk at the sight of her bewildered daughter-in-law. Hope was a miniature, fragile girl with light hair, a prisoner of a wheelchair. At 27, she was suddenly struck by a stroke, leaving her disabled. Hope not only lost the ability to move, but also became locked in silence. She almost always sat in her wheelchair, immersed in quiet. Eleanor cared for her daughter-in-law, while William was busy at work at an insurance company. Sometimes Hope felt that her husband deliberately stayed late, just to avoid returning to his helpless wife, unable to even manage the simplest needs herself. It should be noted that Eleanor had never been particularly fond of her daughter-in-law. She disliked Hope's ambition and drive for achievement. The mother-in-law believed that a wife's place was to support her husband, not to rush around all day on business for the company where she worked. Hope was an assistant to the CEO of a large company. Over time, the girl dreamed of promotion, of a permanent position. Ideally, she wanted to have her own business, but for now, she had neither the means nor the suitable opportunities. The stroke wiped away any trace of sympathy Eleanor had for her daughter-in-law. If before she had simply tormented the girl with nagging, after the incident, she constantly resorted to shouting. She couldn't stand Hope's silent requests and often forgot about medication or lunch. Her only solace was Hope's silence, which didn't prevent the mother-in-law from immersing herself again and again in the world of plays, in which she had once shone on the theatre stage. While William carried the heavy suitcases to the car, Hope sat opposite the door, confined to her chair, watching the events unfold with silent horror. Her eyes, red from restrained tears, expressed deep pain. "Don't worry," Eleanor's voice sneered. "Your doctor said you have a weak heart. You won't last long. But the air in the village is good. Maybe you'll even live through this year. A little house in the village. Didn't you ever dream of going back there?" A whirlwind of thoughts swirled in Hope's head, but not one could break free. Her hands lay limply on her knees. If she could, she would have squeezed the fabric of her sweatpants until it hurt, and then erupted in a scream, saying everything she thought about this old grey hag. "Willie, dear darling, what's taking you so long?" Out of breath, he climbed the stairs, breathing heavily, each step a struggle. He looked at his mother, holding out a hand as if trying to ward her off. "The elevator was broken down there. I had to carry all this from the 20th floor. Eleanor threw up her hands and shook her head, giving her daughter-in-law a reproachful look. "And I said we should have hired movers." "Mom, you know perfectly well we don't have the money for that. Once I played in theatres every day, filling halls, and Mikey would come after lectures to watch me," the woman said dreamily. "Could I ever have imagined I'd have to change diapers?" Eleanor looked at her daughter-in-law again and fell silent. A neighbour, Vera Thompson, walked along the landing. "Good afternoon," the neighbour nodded. "Going somewhere?" Eleanor smiled broadly, putting on a mask of benevolence. "Vera, dear, hello. Yes, we're taking Hope, dear, to a sanatorium for rehabilitation. The doctor said it should help." "That must be very expensive." Vera Thompson shook her head. "Oh yes, very expensive, but we'll have to tighten our belts," the mother-in-law sighed. "We can't abandon our daughter-in-law without treatment. She's done so much for us." Vera Thompson said something else and disappeared into her apartment. The smile and pitiful expression instantly vanished from Eleanor's face. She turned to her son and frowned. "Let's hurry before the whole building finds out about our plans. I told you we should have done this early in the morning." William picked up a suitcase and snorted. "In the morning? In this cold? It's autumn outside. Do you want me to freeze all my limbs?" the man asked, and without waiting for an answer, left the apartment, leaving his indignant mother behind. William was the only and adored child in the family. Eleanor and Michael Thompson had him late and doted on him. A professor of law and a dramatic theatre star put their affairs on the back burner, dedicating themselves to raising their son. The result of this overprotection was a frail, nearly 40-year-old man who lived with his mother and worked at a low-paying job, where he was subjected to his boss's mockery and colleagues' dislike. Almost 40 minutes later, William finished carrying all the things and Hope herself. He settled the girl in the back seat, folding her wheelchair. Tears streamed from his eyes, his breathing was uneven. His gaze, full of bewilderment and faint hope, was fixed on her husband. "Hopey, calm down, please," the man whispered softly, adjusting the seatbelt. "There's a neighbour who will look after you. We'll pay her with your money." "Of course," Eleanor interjected. William shrugged and nodded. "We're not doing well with money right now, you see, so yes, it's from yours. You'll be better off there." Hope stared with an unblinking gaze, trying to catch a hint of pity or reluctance in his pale face. But there was nothing, only constant glances around, searching for anyone who might see the crying girl and the man carrying her to the car. William and Hope's car drove away from the house exactly at noon. Eleanor waved and returned home to leaf through her worn play script book again and again, imagining herself on stage to the applause of admiring art lovers. William sighed, speeding up. He tried not to look in the rearview mirror, where he could see the girl's swollen eyes, sitting straight behind him. "Hopey, you understand, don't you? I had no other choice." The man could have sworn the girl raised an eyebrow mockingly. However, after wiping his glasses, he only saw his wife's stony face. "My mother is trying for our good. She's right. I can't look after you constantly. I have work. She's not young anymore, so you'll be better off there. You'll have your own caregiver. You'll go back to your grandmother's house, which you often remembered fondly. So—" William fell silent again, turning away from his wife's gaze. but he felt it on his back, as if the gaze was burning through his thin jacket and imprinted directly on his lungs, making him breathe faster. The journey to the village where Hope was to live was long. The village was remote, almost deserted. It had only a few streets with a small number of houses, one small shop in the centre, and an old first aid post, closed several years ago due to lack of staff. The dark blue car stopped with a rattle near a small house with an overgrown garden and a leaning fence. The house itself, at least from the outside, looked quite decent. The garden was full of ancient trees and thick grass, in places taller than the fence. In front of the window stood an old bench on two small stumps on which someone was lying. While William was getting his wife out of the car, setting up the wheelchair and the things, Hope stared unblinkingly at the silhouette lying near the house of her long-dead grandmother. The girl squinted, but couldn't make out who it was. "Brenda!" William shouted. A short woman with short hair rose from the bench with a grumble. Staggering, she approached the gate. Her face was wrinkled and sagging, her hair tangled. A large crack adorned her lip, and under her eye was an old bruise. Brenda was dressed in an absolutely ridiculous combination of clothes: a yellow t-shirt with some English inscriptions, green short trousers completely unsuitable for the weather, and pink worn-out shoes with rhinestones. "Mr. Thompson!" the woman cried out. "You're early," Brenda said with a slurred tongue. William frowned and turned to his wife. "This is your caregiver, Hope. Meet her. Her name is Brenda. She'll take care of you now." In confirmation, Brenda nodded and swayed. If Hope could, she would certainly have rolled her eyes. The situation seemed to her monstrously ridiculous and terrifying. William unloaded all the suitcases, carried them into the house, and handed Brenda a thin envelope. It clearly didn't contain much, but judging by her appearance, it was enough for her. Then the man stopped in front of the wheelchair and sighed. "Hopi, why are you so unhappy? I'm sure you're smiling inside. It's your childhood home." The man surveyed the overgrown area, the gate that fell apart in his hands, the fresh air, constant care. What more could one need for happiness? Hope wanted to say a million options that would make her happy. However, as usual, she remained silent, glaring at her husband. Every look she gave conveyed more thoughts than anyone could express in words. William understood this, and a small worm of conscience even stirred within him. But then his mother's words and the numbers on the card came to mind, and the worm fell silent, anticipating the taste of money. William got into the car and waved to his wife through the window. Brenda approached her charge, waving back at the man. "Don't worry, Mr. Thompson, everything will be fine." The man forced another smile, and the car drove away from the ill-fated house, leaving Hope alone with the empty, overgrown house and the drunkard who reeked not only of alcohol, but of everything else one could find in the village. A year later, "Will, you seriously haven't visited your wife once in—" Eleanor glanced at the calendar. "In a year?" she said in horror. "Are you completely insane, Will? And who raised you like this? How do you know maybe she died long ago, or worse, got out of the wheelchair?" William tore himself away from the television and looked tiredly at his mother. He had just come home from work and had accidentally mentioned that he hadn't visited his wife once. Eleanor was shocked and indignant. "Brenda calls me every week, everything is fine there. I take her money every quarter. Calm down." Eleanor snorted, walked over to the sofa where her son was lying, snatched the remote, and turned off the cursed box. "When I'm talking to you, you should only look at me," the woman said loudly and a little dramatically, shaking her head with an elaborate high hairstyle. "Brenda? Who is that anyway?" That same drunkard you left to look after your wife. Are you even sure she's looking after her and not drinking the money I give her? Maybe she hasn't been to see Hope for a long time while you're lying here watching TV." William rolled his eyes, staring blankly at the wall. "You want me to go see her tomorrow? Fine. I'll spend my only day off driving to a remote village to see my half-dead wife. Yes, Mom, you really care about me." Snorting loudly, Eleanor threw the TV remote at her son and left the room, quietly voicing everything she thought about him. The next day morning, William packed a few things, took an envelope with money, and got into the car. He looked wistfully at the clock, which showed only 8 in the morning. The man could still be sleeping, but he had to drive somewhere unknown, and most importantly, for some unknown reason. He considered his mother's fears groundless, but he had been accustomed to obeying her in everything since childhood. The journey was long, and as luck would have it, the radio broke. The silence in the car and the rare exclamations of impatient drivers made the morning even worse. Just as he was approaching the village, a large black truck came flying towards him. It was driving fast, clearly knowing the area. The driver was a man who looked a few years younger than William. He braked sharply at the sight of the slowly moving city car and quietly apologized, saying he didn't mean to. William waved tiredly, not wanting to start an argument. He vaguely remembered the way to the house where Hope lived. He used to give the money to Brenda in the district centre, where she would come by bus specifically for the envelope. William had only been to the village 3 times in total. Once when he took his wife there, second when he was looking for Brenda, and third when he was still dating Hope, and she showed him her childhood home, telling him that her mother had spent her childhood there first, and then she herself. The dark blue car stopped next to an almost new fence. The grass in the garden had been mowed, but it had grown back considerably, as if it had been done a long time ago, and in general the area looked neglected, as if no one had been there for a long time. William frowned and got out of the car. He carefully opened the gate and called out for his wife, then for Brenda. Silence. No one answered. The man wanted to go into the house, but there was a huge padlock on the door, blocking his way. William rattled the door, but it didn't open. He took out his phone and started calling Brenda, but she didn't answer. The man tiredly rubbed his forehead and looked around the area. Brenda's house should have been nearby. He had found her very close to Hope's house. At the time it seemed like great luck, but now his mother's suspicions didn't seem so foolish. Brenda didn't inspire confidence. However, for some reason, William had trusted her anyway. Leaving the little house's grounds, the man walked along the street to find Brenda's house. It looked even worse than Hope's house. William went inside and held his nose. An unpleasant smell hit him. It was so strong that William only had the strength to quickly glance around the house. Brenda wasn't there, and he quickly rushed out of the house, breathing deeply. Catching his breath, he looked up and saw a stout woman with 2 buckets walking by. "William!" he shouted and ran towards her. "Excuse me, do you know where Hope is?" The woman frowned. "She lived in that house," William pointed. "And Brenda? Brenda, dear, the drunkard who was looking after her?" William nodded affirmatively. "Well, then she's most likely at Old Man Miller's. He lives at the end of the village. She buys moonshine from him. And who are you?" "It doesn't matter," William waved it off. "Show me where Old Man Miller's house is." "Why not?" The woman showed him the way to the local moonshiner's house. Brenda was indeed inside. She was sitting at a huge round table and drinking a yellow liquid that filled the air with its aroma. William grabbed Brenda by the arms and led her outside. "Where's Hope? Who's being cheeky?" Brenda asked loudly with a slurred tongue. She seemed to be looking straight ahead and seeing nothing. My wife? Where is she, you drunken hag? She lives not far from here, Brenda smirked, raising a hand that wouldn't obey. And what will I get for it? William angrily took out his wallet and pulled out a few bills, shoving them at Brenda. She counted the money briskly and nodded with satisfaction. Then she slipped out of the man's firm grip and flew into Old Man Miller's house. She came out without the money, but with a large bottle of cloudy yellow liquid. "Let's go," the woman waved and hobbled forward, trying not to fall. William followed. The woman led him beyond the street. They walked a long way down an empty road. The man thought Brenda was trying to confuse him and was about to yell at her, but in the distance the roof of an unknown house appeared. The closer William and Brenda got to it, the more surprised he was by the size of the house compared to the other buildings in the village. It seemed simply enormous. 3 floors, a balcony, a huge garden in the backyard. Several cars and agricultural machinery were visible. Brenda stopped not far from the iron gates of the house and pointed straight ahead. "Here you go, sign for it." She nodded so hard her head almost came off and walked away without saying anything else. William was in shock at what he saw, so he didn't respond to the woman's phrase. He pressed the small doorbell. A clear, joyful voice rang out. "Nick, why are you so early?" William was taken aback, frozen in place for a second. "Hope?" he asked softly. The voice on the other side fell silent, then sighed deeply. "Will, come in." The door swung open, revealing a huge garden and a stone path lined with a vast number of flowers. Stepping carefully along the path, William walked inside. On the steps of the house stood a short, petite girl with light hair. She was dressed in a beige suit and a shawl. She looked down at her husband. Her face was almost impenetrable, as if frozen in a mask. "I thought you weren't going to show up," the girl smirked. "But come in, since you're here." William was speechless. He simply walked slowly behind his wife, who was walking with loud steps through the house. Inside, the house was furnished simply but tastefully. Pleasant colours, beautiful decorations and paintings, soft, clean carpets. One of the doors led to a small office with a computer and a desk piled high with papers. "Oh, don't look in there. We've been in a complete mess with papers lately. We need to sort it out better." William didn't understand anything, but he shifted his gaze to his wife, who looked even better than before the stroke. Her pale face was covered with a healthy blush. Her rosy lips were glossy, and her eyes were slightly made up. Nothing excessive, but it seemed William had never seen such beauty. Hope led the man to a large room with sofas and armchairs. "I'll make some tea and we'll talk." Hope went to the kitchen for tea, leaving William alone in the room. He sat down in an armchair, unable to tear his eyes away from the beauty of the room, the paintings, the sofas, the flowers, the carpets. It all seemed unreal. The man even pinched himself to prove it was reality. He couldn't believe he had expected to see a sick wife in a wheelchair, and instead stood before him a beauty he had never seen in his life. Hope returned a couple of minutes later, with a large tray holding several cups of tea. She handed one cup to her husband and took the second herself, sitting down carefully opposite him. "Didn't expect this?" she asked softly. The man shook his head. "I also didn't expect that for money my beloved husband would send me away to die." "I thought—" "Keep your pointless excuses to yourself," Hope asked him. "I know everything about you, dear. You're too bad at hiding the truth. It's all about my inheritance. When I received the will from my grandmother in Germany, I was incredibly happy, imagining the life we would have together. But then I saw something that made me change my mind." "What?" William stammered. He held the hot teacup in his hands, as if not noticing the pain, and looked directly into his wife's face, hoping to see something there that would help him understand what was happening. "Remember my friend?" Hope asked. "Tanya? We worked together at the company." William nodded. "She's the one who advised me to change my life 1.5 years ago." Tall, stately Tatiana sat in an armchair at a small restaurant where their boss had sent them for negotiations that had already finished. "Dinner's paid for. Why not splurge?" Hope smirked, settling more comfortably opposite Tatiana. Tatiana was Hope's colleague. She worked at the company with Hope, was several years older than her, and held the position of department head. She always wore strict suits and had very definite opinions on many things, especially regarding finances. Hope opened a small handbag, took out an envelope, and handed it to her friend. "Look, what do you think? Is it real?" Tatiana opened the envelope with interest and read the letter. It was a letter from Germany. "Who is Anna Reuter?" "My grandmother," Hope replied, "on my father's side. She married a German when my father was 6 or 7, and they went to live there. Then Dad returned to Russia and met Mom. The last time I saw Grandma was at Dad's funeral. She offered me to go with her." "And why didn't you agree?" Tatiana asked in surprise. "Was I supposed to abandon William? He has his mother here, his job, and I never dreamed of living abroad." Tatiana looked at her colleague with incomprehension. "You're incorrigible, Hopi, trading a good life in Germany for a man." Hope rolled her eyes. She knew her friend's opinion about her husband perfectly well and preferred not to listen to it. Tatiana was always very sharp in her statements, which helped her career growth but resulted in few friends. They all scattered because of her bluntness. "Your William would be ready to sell his own mother for money. Do you even know how much your grandmother left you?" "There was a letter attached," Hope replied. "She wrote that I was her last relative, and she was leaving part of her inheritance to her husband's children and part to me. Judging by the letter, it's a very decent sum, as well as a small share in an estate in Germany." "Do you need to go there to get it?" Tatiana asked. "There are instructions on what to do. You can accept the inheritance in Russia. The notary will come here himself." A waiter approached and brought their food. The girls ordered salads and glasses of wine. "I can imagine how happy William will be. He always dreamed of money, of his own business." "You dreamed of it too," Tatiana noted, waving her fork. "And unlike him, you have the opportunity to run it." "Don't talk about William like that. He's a good person. He's just unlucky." Tatiana laughed loudly. "Yes, and his biggest misfortune was his mother. Not a mother-in-law, but I still don't understand why you live with her when you could move out." Hope shrugged. "Eleanor can't live alone. She's not used to it, and it's not that hard for me to tolerate her." Tatiana snorted in displeasure and sipped her wine. "I wouldn't advise telling them about the inheritance. They'll either send you to the next world for that money, or they'll start fawning over you and take every last penny." Hope slammed her palm on the table and looked threateningly at her friend. "William and I love each other. Nothing like that will happen. Don't escalate things. You have too low an opinion of my family. Really?" The conversation ended inconclusively. That same evening, Hope came home, told her family about the inheritance, and showed them the envelope. The girl had never seen them so happy. That evening, Eleanor opened a bottle of expensive wine and, despite their constant economizing, ordered food delivery for William to celebrate. Hope felt like her life had started to improve. A few weeks later, Hope was walking down the street, smiling at everything around her. Life at home had gotten better. Eleanor stopped nagging her. William started coming home from work earlier and spending more time with his wife. Hope was sure that her life had improved and that it would always be this way now. The girl decided to stop near a men's clothing store. She wanted to buy her husband a new tie as a gift. He was tired of all his old ones. Hope was absorbed in looking at the display window and didn't notice anything around her. Then she turned her head and saw William. She wanted to call out to him, but then she noticed a girl walking towards him. The man hugged her and kissed her. Struck unexpectedly in the gut, Hope stumbled and leaned on the display window to keep her balance. She couldn't believe what she saw. Hope didn't make a scene. She simply went home and went to bed early, thinking about what had happened before falling asleep. The next morning, the girl took a day off work and went to a local detective agency. A short, thin man in glasses sat at a small table. He was reading a newspaper and drinking coffee. Hope sat down opposite him and explained the situation. "What exactly do you need?" "Everything," Hope said. "How did they meet? How long have they been seeing each other? Their words, actions, meeting places. I want to know everything." The man whistled, but said nothing. He seemed surprised by the girl's eagerness. However, he chose to remain silent so as not to lose the client. For a whole week, Hope was in a state of limbo. She didn't dare tell Tatiana the truth, not wanting to hear her say she was right. But she had to admit, Tatiana was indeed right. It was as if she always saw right through William, disliking their relationship. She refused to be a witness at the wedding, which hurt Hope deeply. They soon made up, but the residue of hurt remained with the girl to this day. Only now did she begin to understand her friend, who had only wanted to reach her. A week later, Hope sat alone in a small coffee shop, drinking her now cold coffee. She was contemplating what was happening. Everything in her head just wouldn't fit together into one picture. The girl had always tried for her husband, doing everything he or his mother asked. She had even swallowed her pride, lowering her ambitions. The girl was interrupted from her thoughts by a phone call. The detective asked her to come in. Throwing a bill onto the table, Hope grabbed her bag and rushed to the agency. Fortunately, it wasn't far. She flew inside and sat down opposite the man, who, as before, was reading a newspaper and drinking coffee. He looked up at his client and adjusted his slipping glasses. "You know, you're lucky your husband's mistress turned out to be so talkative." "Really?" Hope asked, not wanting to hear the answer to her question. But the man nodded anyway. "I had to follow her for almost a week, interview her friends, but I found out everything. Her name is Lily Peterson. She's 22, a graduate of a pedagogical university. They met your husband a few months ago on the street, it seems." "Thank you for the information. What about facts like video or—" The detective, smiling broadly, reached into a desk drawer and pulled out a huge, old-fashioned voice recorder. Hope was truly surprised by what she saw. She hadn't seen such devices since childhood. It seemed they weren't made anymore. After fiddling with something, the man turned on a loud, sometimes crackling recording. "Willie!" a clear female voice cried out. "Is this for me? Oh my God, how beautiful. Must be expensive." "I spare no expense for you," William said with a satisfied voice. "Once I open my business, I can spoil you with trinkets every day." "And when—" "Willie?" the girl asked again. "You said you didn't have money for your business yet?" There were no sounds, but Hope was ready to swear. William smiled broadly. "My wife has money. She recently got an inheritance from her grandmother. We'll open a business with her money and live well." "You'll leave her, won't you?" she said, as if through pouted lips. "As soon as she's no longer useful to me, yes," William said loudly. And the recording continued. The man and the girl were talking about something. However, Hope was no longer listening. She was lost in her thoughts, sitting with a perfectly straight back and staring straight ahead. She remembered meeting her husband and how happy she was when he proposed. Hope was 11 years younger than William. They met when she was finishing her economics degree. He invited her to cozy cafes, walked her through the park under the stars, bought tickets to the theatre and concerts. Eleanor seemed very nice and kind then. Hope, who had recently lost her mother, fell in love with the intellectual family and was ready to marry the not-so-rich and shy William. Tatiana was against it, but Hope didn't listen. She was consumed by new feelings. Memories flashed in the girl's mind of choosing William's wedding suit with him, and how after the celebration they sorted through gifts, counting which relatives gave the most. At that time, the girl was incredibly happy. She was sure she would always be this happy. Despite the fact that William wasn't at all happy about her dreams of business and career, he, and more so his mother, wanted a family and children. The girl wasn't ready for that. She wanted more. Now all her dreams and hopes for a life together had collapsed in an instant. William, the very same William who had never raised his voice at his wife, was contemplating how he would open a business with Hope's money and leave her. It seemed so wild that the girl sat there staring blankly at the wall for several minutes. The detective didn't interfere. He had seen worse reactions. This was the most normal. Once, a crazy wife had simply smashed his window in a fit of rage at her husband. At the time, it seemed wild, the ultimate measure of disappointment and anger. But now he looked into the girl's eyes and saw all-consuming hatred and pain that even affected him. The man got up and went to get some water for his client. Hope drank the water in one gulp and then remembered her friend's words that William was ready to sell his own mother for money. The girl hadn't believed Tatiana then, but now it seemed true. A wicked grin began to form on the girl's intelligent face, and the detective recoiled. He had never seen such an expression. Several months later, William's dark blue car drove away from the leaning fence, leaving Hope behind. Her wheelchair was being held by Brenda, though she was more clinging to the wheelchair than holding it. As soon as the car disappeared from sight, Hope got up. Brenda's eyes widened in shock, watching her charge simply get up from the wheelchair after a stroke. "Brenda, let's make a deal. I'll pay you the same amount my husband pays you, and you won't tell him what you saw." Brenda nodded dumbfounded, unable to ask questions. She was still clinging to the wheelchair. "Excellent, we'll be great friends. Here's your first payment." Hope held out a few bills. "You'll come every month, and I'll give you money. In turn, you must report to your husband that my condition hasn't changed, and he doesn't need to visit. Clear?" The woman nodded, snatched the bill, and without saying goodbye, walked away, while Hope went into the house to change. Inside the old little house, everything was dusty. The furniture was covered with cloth, and there was garbage everywhere. One window was even broken, probably kids trying to get in. Hope walked over to the old red sofa, pulled the cloth off it, and sat down tiredly on a chair. A cloud of dust formed around her. The girl took out her phone from her pocket, which Eleanor had miraculously not found, and dialed the only number she could trust. "Come over, everything happened just as you said. Yes, the house in the village, I'm waiting." Throwing the phone aside, Hope lay down. A swarm of thoughts buzzed in her head. She thought about everything and nothing at the same time. An hour and a half later, when Hope had tidied up the house, changed and prepared food, the door opened and a tall girl in a strict blue suit entered. She had a small bag in her hands, wine and take-out food. "Scrambled eggs don't appeal to me," Tatiana smirked, nodding towards the old, dirty frying pan, which was covered in such a thick layer of grease that it was probably impossible to wash it. "Good thing you brought wine. I definitely wouldn't have survived this day without it." Tatiana looked around the little house and nodded to herself. Then her gaze fell on a package of diapers, and she shook her head. "You sat in this? God, it's absolutely disgusting for 3 weeks." "Yes, I can't disagree. But you know what bothered me more?" Hope asked, taking dishes out of the cupboards. "What?" Tatiana was wiping the table and arranging the food containers. "Eleanor only changed my diaper once a day. It was as if she didn't notice I was going to the bathroom. She was so engrossed in her novels that she didn't hear me getting up and walking around the house." Tatiana laughed. "If you'd left the house for a few days, she definitely wouldn't have noticed. The main thing is to put an album with her photos next to her." "Exactly," Hope sighed, sitting down at the table. "I still can't believe they left me to die, and they believed a hastily concocted diagnosis. They heard I didn't have long to live and started rejoicing. Why would they bother questioning the reality of Dr. Stevens' diagnosis?" Tatiana and Hope began to eat, thinking about what they would do next. "I'll live here for a month or two until I figure out how to live on. I have 0 plans for the future. For the first time in my life, I have no plans." "And what are you going to do here?" Tatiana asked. "An old abandoned house, an overgrown garden, a remote village. You and such a place are incompatible." "If I jump head first into the abyss now, I'll definitely fail. It's not the right state of mind," Hope explained. "You see, I gave up on my dreams of my own business a long time ago. All the groundwork, ideas, have been gathering dust somewhere in the depths of the apartment, and, as I see it, everything is long outdated. I'll live here, clear my head, maybe I'll come up with something. I haven't had a vacation in a long time." Tatiana shrugged. She didn't know what to say to her friend. For the first time she was speechless too. She didn't like William, without knowing why. It was foolish of her to refuse to be a witness. However, she didn't think he was capable of such a thing. She had joked about him being ready to sell his own mother. To her, William seemed spineless, incapable of anything except processing insurance. But he was able to abandon a person to die, and not just any person, but his wife. It seemed like some kind of madness. Tatiana spent the first night with her friend in this house and went home the next morning. Hope quit her job. But Tatiana didn't, and she didn't have a rich inheritance from a grandmother. Hope started the new day with a cold shower. Fortunately, her grandmother's house had water and even gas. Her parents had installed all the modern conveniences for her grandmother in the house. But she died soon after, never fully able to use them. The cold shower managed to clear her thought-filled head a little, and Hope took a deep breath, feeling the icy drops of water hitting her back. 3 weeks of living in hell were over. She had put her husband to the test. She had hoped to see at least a drop of care or love from him, but in the end she only got hatred and the expectation of her speedy death. This was the worst thing. Therefore, Hope couldn't quickly return to her old rhythm. Her familiar life was over. She needed to shake things up. She took out the money she had hidden from her suitcase when no one was looking. The girl went to the shop. She vaguely remembered its location and decided to ask the villagers, as it was early morning and everyone was either going to work or to their gardens. It was autumn, the weather was cool outside, especially in the morning, and Hope wrapped herself more comfortably in an old coat she found in the cupboard. She managed to find the shop without the help of passers-by. It was exactly the same as it had been 20 years ago. The girl smirked at the sight of the familiar, colourful sign and the blurry window through which she could see the counters and the stout saleswoman in a blue apron. Stepping inside, Hope inhaled the familiar smell of fresh bread and lemonade, which the saleswoman loved. The woman's name was Valerie. When Hope was little, she had just started working there. Now, she was probably in charge of the shop. "Aunt Valerie, hello, do you recognize me?" Hope asked. The woman thought for a moment. "Something familiar, but I just can't remember." "I'm Margaret Davis's granddaughter. I was here as a child." "Oh, Hope dear, how could I not recognize you?" the woman asked, coming out from behind the counter. She hugged Hope, kissing her on the cheek. "You haven't been here for so long, and nothing has changed for us." "I noticed. Will you sell me some groceries?" Hope asked, looking at the counters. They were filled with food, although the shop seemed very small. The girl checked the prices and realized they were even higher than in the city. "The prices are huge after all." Valerie threw up her hands. "Give me a loaf of black and white bread, a bottle of milk, butter and vegetable oil, a kilogram each of pasta, buckwheat, rice and peas, cheese, sugar, salt, and— oh, Hope dear, go to Mrs. Peterson's for dairy. She lives right next to you. And this milk," the woman nodded at the counter, "is too bad even for a cat. It has a shelf life of 6 months. Where have you ever seen milk last that long? For vegetables, potatoes, onions, beets, carrots, go to Mr. Adams. Everything here is from the local farmer, but it's been sitting for a long time. Almost everyone in the village has their own gardens, and Mr. Adams always sells cheap. Ask for directions. He's not far from the shop." Valerie fell silent. Her words were interrupted by a bell and a man who rushed into the shop. He was dressed in dirty clothes. His face was very serious. He pushed Hope away from the counter and said loudly, "Valerie, give me 2 bottles of mineral water, and there was a delivery left here for you, a box of medicines and pest poison. We need to plant for winter soon, and there's nothing to treat with." "Nicholas, don't you see there's a customer here?" Valerie asked sternly. Nicholas glanced at the girl and waved his hand. "She's from the city. If she needs it so much, let her buy it there. I need it urgently." "Nicholas!" Valerie looked at him sternly. Hope raised her hand in a conciliatory gesture. "Let him go, Aunt Valerie. He seems to need it more." Valerie, looking displeased, went to get the box. "Couldn't it have waited just a few minutes?" The man was tall, dark-haired. His hands were calloused from work, and his gaze was stern. Hope hadn't seen people like him since childhood. Despite his working, slightly untidy appearance, Nicholas was quite handsome and a young man. He was clearly over 30, but definitely not more than 40. He looked at the girl, squinting. "And is that so important to you?" the man asked rudely. "I'm not in a hurry, of course, but even in the city people queue, and there, believe me, they're in a much bigger hurry than you." Hope smirked and turned away, feeling the intense gaze of the man's brown eyes on her. Valerie came out with a heavy box and handed it to the customer. "Take it, the mineral water is over there." She nodded towards the far corner, where mineral water was indeed stacked in plastic packs. "You'll pay later, right?" Nicholas nodded, grabbed 2 bottles of mineral water, and left the shop without saying goodbye. "Who was that?" Hope asked Valerie. The woman waved her hand and went to the shelf with cereals. "Local farmer. He inherited a small house and livestock from his father about 8 years ago. He decided to start a farm, built everything himself, managed it, hired workers, makes do as best he can. He wants to plant fields, but for now he only plants large gardens and sells produce to our shop and in neighbouring villages. He's not a bad guy, just a bit rough. Nobody knows why." Hope picked up several bags of groceries and carried them home. They were heavy, and she barely made it, but the small refrigerator in the house no longer looked so bare. Then the girl went to get vegetables and dairy products from the people Valerie had recommended. Although the girl was used to buying everything in the city shop, in the village it was cheaper and better to buy from ordinary people. Mr. Adams lived indeed not far from the shop. He had a large plot of land and 2 goats, which bleated loudly at the sight of Hope. As a child, the girl was afraid of animals, so she avoided them now. In the house, Hope found an old man who was crafting a chair. The girl explained the situation and introduced herself. "Hope, dear, I'm so happy to meet you," the old man smiled through his thick grey beard. "There haven't been young people in the village for so long. You're the first in many years. And Margaret's granddaughter, too. I only remember her daughter, Natalie, dear." "Yes, that's my mother," the girl nodded. "But anyway, will you sell me some vegetables?" "I can give you some apples as change too," Mr. Adams smiled. "Mine are good, ripe, juicy, and they'll keep well for winter. And for compotes, jam, will you take some?" Hope smiled happily. However, the smile disappeared from her face when she left the old man's house with 3 huge bags that weighed twice as much as the previous ones. Mr. Adams decided to sell her enough produce for a month and a half, apparently thinking the girl would only eat potatoes and beets. Hope felt awkward refusing, so she sacrificed her back, which definitely couldn't handle the load. After walking just a couple of steps, Hope stopped, placing the heavy bags on the ground. A black car with a large back pulled up not far from her. "Need help?" Hearing a familiar voice, Hope looked up and saw Nicholas, looking at the girl's bags. Remembering the man's words in the shop, the girl started thinking. She didn't want to ride with a man who didn't know how to be polite, but she also didn't want to drag the huge bags. So she had to swallow her pride again. Yes, that would be helpful. Nicholas got out of the car and picked up the bags. "You really stocked up? Are you planning to winter here?" "No, making compote, frying potatoes." The girl smirked and picked up a smaller bag, helping to load it into the back. Nicholas turned around and took the bag from the girl's hands. Hope felt his warm touch and froze for a second. Then she let go of the rough fabric and took a few steps back. Nicholas put the bag down and closed the back. "Show me the way where to take you." "Of course I will," Hope said, getting into the passenger seat. "Such a one from the city came to us?" "Well, yes," Hope said thoughtfully. "And what attracted you here?" "I grew up here," Hope shrugged. "And there were problems at home, and I needed somewhere to be alone. I remembered this little house. I always loved this village. It's quiet and peaceful. Nothing interferes with thinking." "Yes, that's true." Nicholas drove fast. Either he was in a hurry, or it was just his personal driving style. However, he wasn't slow only when driving. In the shop or on the street, he also didn't linger, so Hope decided it was his characteristic trait. The bags were unloaded and even carried into the house. Nicholas walked through the grass, which reached his waist. It had already started to dry, so it rustled loudly underfoot. "Is there really no one to mow? Grandma did it herself almost until she died. She could do literally everything, from cutting and sewing to mowing and fixing the roof, and I'm a city softie." "Hardly any women in our village know how to mow, not even with an electric trimmer. Equality hasn't reached here," he smirked. "You're from the city, aren't you?" "Yes," the man replied and glanced at his watch. "Look at the time, I have to go." "And what's your name?" "Hope," the girl introduced herself. "Beautiful name. Nice to meet you, Hope." "Nice to meet you too, Nicholas," the girl smiled. Nicholas left, leaving the girl alone. Hope watched the departing car for a long time, trying to understand the motives of this man. The next morning began with a rattle and a strange rustling sound. Hope, tossing and turning, got up from the creaky bed and went to the window. Outside, in the middle of the overgrown grass, stood Nicholas with an old scythe. The grass lay in neat rows under Nicholas's movements. It was clear that he was sweating, despite the cool morning weather. Hope threw open the window and called out to the man. Nicholas looked around, stopping his mowing. He was breathing deeply, looking at the open window, and the girl looking at him. Hope was wearing only a long linen dress she had found in the cupboard and decided to use as a nightgown. After cleaning the house and cooking, the girl was quite tired. She had no time left to unpack her things, so she put on what she found in her grandmother's cupboard. "What are you doing?" Nicholas raised his eyebrows, silently expressing his opinion of the foolish question. "I understand you're mowing, but why are you doing it at my house?" "Do you want me to stop?" Nicholas asked, looking at the girl with a hint of sarcasm. Hope shook her head and closed the window, not wanting to continue the conversation. Besides, she had noticed the man's gaze. He was clearly looking her over. To avoid such situations repeating, the girl changed her clothes and went to the small kitchen. Hope decided to make pancakes. Of course, she had never gotten up so early and didn't want to cook anything. Moreover, the fast-paced city rhythm had taught her not to eat breakfast, but she had to feed the unexpected helper who had decided to come to her house early in the morning and work. By the time Nicholas finished, which was clear from the cessation of the scythe's sound, the pancakes were ready. Hope was just frying the last one. The girl went out onto the porch and called to the helper. "Come in for breakfast." The man shrugged, put down the scythe and entered the house. He was all sweaty and tired. "You can use the shower." Hope nodded towards the bathroom and went into the kitchen. Nicholas didn't take up the hostess's offer, only washed his face. He came into the kitchen and sat down at the table. In front of him was a plate of pancakes and sour cream. Hope stood next to the table, arms crossed. "How much do I owe you?" Nicholas raised his eyebrows in a question mark. "Well, you didn't do it for free, did you?" "For the food," the man smirked and took a bite of a pancake. Leaning back in his chair, he looked directly into the girl's eyes, as if wanting to read something in them. "Well, if you don't want payment, I won't insist," Hope shrugged. "I'm used to any work being paid for. Haven't you heard of help in the city?" Hope snorted and laughed. "You yourself said you're from the city. Aunt Valerie told me you've lived here for 8 years, which means you can't reproach me." "I'm not reproaching you. It's just that city people are always surprised when they're helped for free. I used to be like that too." "And why aren't you eating, by the way?" Nicholas asked, tilting his head. He was looking at the girl with interest. "I don't eat breakfast," the girl waved it off. "I always had to go to work early. I'm not used to it. I usually snacked at work." "And what did you do?" Nicholas asked, tilting his head. "Assistant to the CEO of a company." Nicholas whistled and smiled. "It's surprising that after that you ended up here," he gestured around the small house with worn wallpaper. "Don't think I was raking in money, only with a child's shovel, a very small child's shovel. But I liked it. I was learning about running a business, and I had a dream. Then I had a stroke," the girl chuckled. "But I'll tell you that story another time. I need to clean the house and the attic today. Besides, my friend promised to come in the evening. A busy life, you know." Nicholas smiled back at her words. "I should probably go too." Nicholas finished his breakfast and left Hope's house. She watched him leave again with a long gaze, trying to understand his motives. That evening, Tatiana arrived. She brought some things Hope had asked for. Tatiana whistled when she saw the mowed and tidy plot. She put down her bags and called out to her friend, who was wiping the cloudy windows at that moment. "I need to replace the glass. Where do you think I can find a handyman?" she asked without greeting her. Tatiana smirked. "Ask the man who mowed your whole yard." "That was Nicholas, the local farmer. He gave me a ride yesterday. I don't think he has time for glass." Hope waved it off. "Well, he found time for the grass," Tatiana shrugged. "What farmer?" Hope stopped wiping the glass. She invited her friend into the house. "If you don't mind, peel the potatoes. They're under the sink. I can't do anything else. I'm tired." Hope sank into a chair and wiped her forehead with the back of her hand. Tatiana took off her jacket and picked up a knife. "So what's up with the farmer?" I didn't know him before. He came here 8 years ago. My grandmother died around that time. He runs a farm, has various animals, gardens. What else is there to say about him?" "Is he rich?" "Tanya," the girl reproached. "What?" Tatiana protested. "It's very important nowadays. Okay, what about him as a man?" Hope thought for a moment. "I don't even know. He's kind of ambiguous. First he was rude to me in the shop, and then he decided it was a good idea to give me a ride. And he even came in the morning to mow the grass, even though I didn't ask. And then he refused to take money." "Maybe he likes you?" "Don't be silly," Hope waved it off. "He thinks I'm a city fool, as far as I understand." "Take a closer look at him. Maybe for once in your life you'll have a normal man who knows he's a man." Hope rolled her eyes but said nothing to that. "How's work?" "Oh, don't ask. Our boss has completely gone off the rails without you. He's already changed his third assistant. He can't do anything. Turns out you did more than we all thought." Hope had been living in the village for a month. She had gotten used to the small house and the quiet life, and she had also gotten used to resting, which terribly annoyed her. The girl had worked all her life. She grew up in a not-so-rich family and started working right after studying. She didn't take days off without special reasons and always came to work on time. And now she had been doing almost nothing for a month. Yes, Hope spent the first week on the house, trying to bring it into a decent state, scrubbing everything around. But then silence and calm set in. The girl got up late, read books brought by Tatiana, visited the old women and listened to their stories from their youth. Moreover, Hope couldn't shake the feeling that she kept running into Nicholas. On the day Tatiana visited, he overheard the conversation about the glass and came the next morning to replace it. Hope fed him pancakes. Then he fixed the gate. The girl prepared him breakfast again. This happened several more times, and it became a habit. Hope was no longer surprised by the early rattling outside and the presence of the man under her window, and Nicholas, as usual, came into the house and sat down at the table. There were almost no long and meaningful conversations between them. He didn't give her flowers, didn't pay her compliments. He was just there. He was nearby. It seemed very strange. Hope desperately wanted to understand his motives. "Admit it, Nicholas. You just come here to eat?" "I didn't say that," the man smirked, tearing himself away from the dripping faucet. Most of their conversations were like this, short, not very meaningful, and usually joking. Rumours spread in the village, and some girl from the farm even came to Hope, threatening her. "Nicholas is mine, got it?" the curvy brunette said menacingly. "Do you think you came here from your city and can snatch our men? No way." The stranger angrily tore a leaf from a tree and threw it at the startled Hope, who was standing on the porch. When Nicholas came the next time, she told him about the admirer. "Were you scared?" The man smirked, but there seemed to be a hint of seriousness in his words. I haven't been scared of village women yet. I've been threatened by big grown men when I worked at a large company. Once, instead of my boss, I refused to sign a contract with a firm, and they almost beat me right there. 5 grown men in suits, and I was alone. That's scary. Not a leaf thrown by some crazy admirer of a man who, for some unknown reason, fixes everything that breaks in my house. Nicholas smiled and fell silent. You're not very talkative, are you? The man nodded. Maybe we should switch to you? We don't seem to have that big a age difference. Nicholas agreed to the girl's suggestion and returned to his borscht. Hope smirked. It was the first time she had seen a man who didn't want to talk. One day, Hope was walking around the village. Nicholas hadn't visited her for a long time, and she assumed he had gotten bored. She went for a walk to clear her head, and somewhere deep down she hoped she would meet Nicholas along the way. For some reason, she really wanted to see him again. She had gotten so used to his strange silence that she almost missed it. The only thing the girl encountered in the village were men running back and forth. They were talking about something. Hope approached Valerie, who had come out of the shop and was looking somewhere in the distance with concern. Aunt Valerie, what happened? The woman put her hand to her face. Well, Nicholas's farm is falling apart. Something's wrong there. Some problems. Our men and women are quite upset. They might lose their jobs. And where else can you find work in our village? Oh, what a disaster. Nicholas always barely stayed afloat. He managed as best he could, but now something has gone completely wrong. Hope frowned and looked into the distance. Could you tell me the way to Nicholas's farm? Valerie explained how to get to Nicholas, to his workplace. His farm was at the very end of the village. It was a large, long building from which the lowing of cows could be heard. Here and there, women in aprons walked around and carried buckets. In the backyard were men. Behind the farm were large vegetable gardens. Now, in mid-autumn, they were empty. Hope asked a passing woman where Nicholas's office was and went there. The man's office was small, even tiny. In the middle stood a desk and chair, in the corner a cupboard and a small window in the wall, through which crumbs of light filtered in. Nicholas himself stood in the middle of the office, bent over papers. He was mouthing something, calculating on a calculator, and making corrections to documents. Hope approached him. Nicholas, hello? The man turned sharply and sighed. Did something break again? He asked. Sorry, now's not the best time. No, Hope replied. I heard you have problems. I came to help. Something with the documents? It's fine, I'll manage, the man said a little roughly, and she stepped closer and almost pushed Nicholas aside, taking hold of the papers. The man exhaled loudly. Go away, or I'll have to drag you out of here by force. Hope raised her hand and looked closely. She had only glanced at the papers, but she already saw huge sums and excessive expenses that for this small place, relative to the city, were simply unnecessary. Do you even have an accountant or a financial specialist? I manage everything myself, Nicholas repeated. I see how you're managing. Fabulous expenses going nowhere. You urgently need a specialist. And where am I supposed to get one? Nicholas asked, frowning. Hope smiled broadly and pointed to herself. I'm an economist by education. Besides, I worked for several years at a company where the expenses and income were clearly much larger than yours. Nicholas waved his hand and sat down tiredly on the chair, leaving Hope with the papers. Late in the evening, when it was already dark, Nicholas and Hope left his office. The farm was empty. The workers had tidied everything up and closed. Are you sure that if we cut these expenses, nothing will change? Why do you need both cold storage cameras and milk delivery 3 times a day? Once is enough. it will be taken away, and the rest of the time it will be stored in the refrigerator. There's no point in running cars and spending huge amounts of money on that. And it's the same with many expenses. The estimates are very unskillfully compiled. Nicholas scratched the back of his head in confusion. I was a soldier, actually. I'm far from estimates, accounting. My father just always dreamed of having his own big farm and fields, but I decided to fulfill his dream, even if it's late. Late? Did he die? Thank God, no. He got seriously ill. I had to put him in a special facility, otherwise I just wouldn't have been able to cope with him, so I had to raise the farm from its knees. Hope looked sympathetically at Nicholas, walking along the narrow path. It was cool outside, the wind was blowing, but at the same time it felt like it couldn't be better. So calm and quiet. So what's the story with the stroke? Nicholas asked unexpectedly. Hope flinched. At first, she wanted to make a joke, but then she remembered she had promised to tell him. Exhaling loudly, she began her story. That's when I came up with that plan. She remembered the conversation with the detective. Hope and Tanya helped me carry it out. She found a doctor who, for a small fee, agreed to say I had a stroke and would die soon. They believed it quickly, as if without thinking and expecting it. It was terrible. The 3 weeks I lived with my husband and mother-in-law completely wiped out any pity or sympathy I had for him. I became forgotten and unwanted. And when he brought me here, I realized this was the end. Nicholas took the girl's hand and squeezed it tightly. Hope looked at the hand the man was holding and nodded in thanks for his support. Why don't you go back to the city? At first I just wanted to calm down and wait a bit, but then I realized I didn't want to go back there. The pace is so fast, constant rushing, plus it's another reminder of William and his mother. Nicholas let go of the girl's hand and sped up. Let's go, I'll show you something. They walked for a long time. Hope didn't know where. However, when they arrived, she gasped in surprise. The man had brought her to a huge, luxurious house with a high fence. This is the house of a friend of mine. We served together. He recently died of cancer. Now the house is for sale, and I don't want it to be sold. I would like to buy it, but as you know, I don't have the money. The house is going to be bought to be demolished and something like a sawmill built here, or I don't even know. You understand, don't you, that if you buy this house, there will be no turning back. I don't want to go back to the city. For the village, I'm too fast, impatient. For the city, I'm too slow. It's a paradox. I can achieve something here, but not there. Hope's gaze settled on the man's stern face, on his eyes that looked at the house with hope, on his tightly pressed lips, and on the wrinkles on his forehead that appeared when Nicholas was thinking about something serious. A determined spark lit up in Hope's eyes. She squeezed Nicholas's hand, just as he had done a few minutes earlier, and smiled. You will definitely succeed, I will help. We will raise the farm and you will be just as your father dreamed, I promise. Nicholas didn't reply again, but the hope that flickered in his eyes made her happy. He believed in the best. Nicholas and Hope started working together. She helped him raise the farm, create new working conditions. They bought new livestock and equipment. Profit began to appear not just on paper. The man was very happy about this. He gave the girl flowers several times as a sign of gratitude, and the tradition of fixing Hope's house returned. He came almost every morning, and she made breakfast. It was their ritual. Several weeks after the walk, Tatiana came to the girl and brought documents. Are you sure? She asked her friend. More than, Hope replied and took the folder. There will be no turning back, Tatiana repeated Hope's own words. I know, and I'm willing to take the risk. Tatiana remained silent, not wanting to argue with her friend. After what had happened, she tried to support her in all her endeavours. Hope hugged the documents to her chest and headed towards the farm. More equipment was due to arrive today, so the girl hurried as much as she could. Besides, she had joyful news. Hope found Nicholas in his office as usual. He was sitting at his desk, writing something. At the sight of the girl, he smiled and brightened up. "You're early," he said, pulling out a chair for Hope. The girl sat down at the desk and placed the papers on it. "Read this." Nicholas took the folder and slowly began to leaf through the papers. With each page, his eyes grew wider and wider. The girl watched his reaction with hidden fear and anticipation. Closing the folder, Nicholas put it on the desk and lowered his eyes to the girl. "What have you done?" he asked hoarsely. "Did you buy the house?" Hope nodded and stood up from the chair. She stood directly opposite the man, tilting her head back and looking him straight in the eyes. "You didn't want it to be torn down. It was your friend's house, and I promised you would succeed." "That's a lot of money," Nicholas exhaled. "It's my money. I do whatever I want with it. Besides, I like the village and—" Nicholas's kiss interrupted Hope's flow of thoughts. "Is this how you decided to get the house?" Hope smirked when Nicholas pulled away. "Is that what you think of me?" he asked hoarsely. "No," the girl exhaled. "I bought this house for us, if you want us to be together. I think I'm in love." The man kissed the girl again. "Me too," he replied, gently hugging Hope. The present. William sat opposite his wife and couldn't believe her story. His hands lay limply on his knees, and his eyes stared straight ahead. He wasn't trying to see anything, he just couldn't turn his head from surprise. "Are you saying you made all this up to test me?" Hope looked at him sadly and sipped her tea. There was a knock at the door. Tatiana entered, wearing a tight blue dress. She looked directly at William and smirked. "Well, did you tell him everything? Too bad I couldn't see his face. I was a little late." "So you knew everything?" William roared. Tatiana smirked. "That was my doctor, whom I paid for the diagnosis. Did you really think Hope did all this alone? She loved you too much to do that. But you broke her heart, decided you could treat her like garbage." William pressed his lips together. "You don't know anything. Hope, I love you. Hope." Hope raised her eyebrows and smirked. "And Lily, does she not suit you any more? Or couldn't she wait for you to open your business and shower her with gifts?" William opened his mouth to object, but at the last moment fell silent, realizing that excuses were pointless. "But how dare you play such a trick on Mom and me?" William asked. "She was so upset when she found out you were sick." Tatiana and Hope exchanged glances and laughed. Eleanor was running ahead of everyone, shouting with joy that her daughter-in-law was sick and would soon kick the bucket. She was waiting for my inheritance more than you were. William looked around the house, then smiled broadly. "Did you buy and earn all this while married to me?" Tatiana frowned, understanding what her friend's husband was getting at. She wanted to object, but he opened his mouth again. "And since you acquired this while married to me, half of the property is mine, right?" Tatiana was a lawyer. She knew the law perfectly well and how such situations ended. Hope got up from the armchair and glared at her husband, wanting to tell him everything she thought of him. But at that moment, the door opened, and the same man from the car that had cut William off entered. "Hi, Nick." Tatiana nodded and whispered something in the man's ear. He turned to William with a very serious, enraged face. It seemed almost impossible to stop him. He advanced on the man. William swallowed in fear and began to back away. "Get out! If you idiot, dare to threaten Hope, I'll make your life hell," Nicholas said roughly, grabbed William by the scruff of the neck, and threw him out of the room. Tatiana, Hope, and Nicholas heard the front door slam. William was walking away from the house quickly. "Why did you let him in?" Nicholas asked Hope, coming closer and hugging her from behind. In front of her husband, she had held herself together, not wanting to show weakness. But everyone in the room knew how hard she had taken her husband's betrayal. The girl stood with her head bowed low, holding back the urge to cry. "I had to tell him everything," the girl said. "I needed to see his face when he realized my inheritance wasn't coming to him." "Did that make you feel better?" Tatiana asked. Hope nodded and wrapped herself tighter in Nicholas's strong and reliable embrace. "I'm filing for divorce tomorrow." Despite Nicholas's threats, William still decided to file a lawsuit for divorce and property division. From a legal standpoint, he was right. If he had claimed the inheritance, he would have been wrong. But the girl had bought the house and leased the fields, the income from which is considered jointly acquired property. A notification from the court arrived by mail. Nicholas brought it with the other documents and handed it to the girl grimly. When Hope opened the envelope and read the summons, she turned pale in a second and sat down tiredly on the sofa. She was all dirty and dusty, having just come from the fields, but she didn't care. She hadn't thought William would actually sue for property division. However, she had also thought he wouldn't abandon her to die. He turned out to be a very unpredictable person. "We need a good lawyer," Nicholas said, taking the notification in his hands. "Tanya," Hope said. "She heads the legal department at the firm. She has a license to handle cases. I think she can help us. Besides, we don't need to tell her our story." Nicholas sat down next to the girl. "Listen, I looked in the bathroom after you yesterday, and—" Hope looked at the man in fright. "I don't know what to say, and I found a test there. Are you pregnant?" Hope nodded. "I didn't know how to tell you. I thought you would be against it, and—" A soft kiss interrupted the girl. She hugged the man and smiled broadly. "So you're not against it?" The man's joyful smile, his mischievous eyes, gave a better answer than any words. He hugged the girl tightly and pulled her close. "If that scoundrel suddenly decides to sue you for half the property, I don't care. We won't be left with nothing. We'll have our house, the fields, the baby, and each other. We'll have each other." Hope closed her eyes and took a deep breath. But when she opened them, Nicholas saw the look that had once scared the detective. It was a determined and unwavering gaze. "He went to court to take what belongs to me by blood, but he will leave there with nothing. I will take not only what is mine, but everything he has. He will be left with nothing." The court hearing took place very soon, as if the universe itself wanted to finish this strange case quickly. Tatiana became Hope's lawyer. Nicholas supported the girl from the witness bench, as did many villagers. The judge was a tall, red-haired woman with a stern gaze. She listened to the plaintiff William's statement with boredom, asking clarifying questions he couldn't always answer. It seemed to amuse her. The plaintiff's witnesses included Eleanor, neighbours, and William's friends. They all spoke only ill of the girl. Eleanor went on and on, as if for the last time putting on her full dramatic flair. "I was so scared when Hope dear, and when she had a stroke, I didn't sleep for 3 nights, waiting for news from the hospital." Tears streamed from the woman's eyes. She wiped them with a white handkerchief and continued. "And when I saw Hope dear, I almost had a heart attack myself. She wasn't moving, she was almost lifeless. I had to take care of her while Willie dear worked. I cleaned up after her, fed her, and she wasn't sick after all. The worst thing I could ever experience has already happened to me. My son and I were betrayed, deceived, and now they want to leave us with nothing." Eleanor cried again and sat back down on the bench. After her speech, the judge seemed to get drawn into the case and listened to the other witnesses with interest. Your Honour, the plaintiff's and his witnesses' words should not be trusted. To begin with, the defendant has evidence of the plaintiff's infidelity. The recording has been attached to the case. The recording of Lillian Williams' conversation boomed throughout the courtroom. Then the detective testified as a witness, talking about the plaintiff's relationship. "A lie!" Eleanor jumped up from the bench, but after a warning from the judge, she sat back down. She seemed deeply offended by the slander. Furthermore, I would like to note that the defendant did not deceive the plaintiff legally. She merely pretended to be sick to test him. No medical certificates were provided. The doctor only verbally gave the patient's diagnosis to the plaintiff and his mother. Also, the plaintiff's side claims to have cared for the sick defendant, Tatiana continued. However, I have a recording of a conversation between citizen Eleanor Thompson and her son. I request it be played. "Yes, Willie dear, feed her. Oh, I got so caught up in reading I completely forgot. But it's okay, she can wait until lunch, she won't lose weight. How are you doing there? Did you find a caregiver for her?" "Good. The main thing is she charges little, and the fact that she drinks, it's nothing serious. The doctor said she wouldn't last long anyway." The conversation ended, and the courtroom gasped in surprise. Tatiana continued. In addition, the plaintiff has filed a petition for the division of the following property: a residential house at the address Ilyanskaya Village, Rapina Street, House 8, as well as income from the fields of the Golden Birch Farm, which were indeed purchased by citizen Hope Davis, that is, the defendant, but this property was transferred to the full ownership of citizen Nicholas Miller a week before the lawsuit was filed. Consequently, the property was acquired during the marriage and also given away during the marriage. Therefore, the plaintiff cannot claim its division. The remaining money in the defendant's personal account and the share in the estate in Germany are part of the inheritance, which the plaintiff also has no right to claim. The judge smirked. She did it almost imperceptibly, but Hope was ready to swear. She looked at William with a hint of joy. To transfer the property to Nicholas's ownership, they had to make an effort and find a corrupt notary who concluded the deal retroactively. This greatly helped the case. "Well then, thus the claim is considered invalid?" the judge asked Tatiana. The claim of William Thompson is aimed at the equal division of property between the former spouses. But this includes not only the defendant's property, but also the plaintiff's own property, namely a 3-room apartment at the address Pegasova Street, House 24, third entrance, apartment 33, a BMW car, as well as money in the joint account of the plaintiff and the defendant. "I object!" William's lawyer, a full old man with a bald head and round glasses, jumped up. "The apartment is the plaintiff's inheritance from his father, correct?" "Correct," Tatiana nodded. "But according to the law, if one of the spouses has made significant changes to the other spouse's property, it can be recognized as joint property." "And what significant changes were made?" the lawyer asked. "Now on the screen, Your Honour, you will see photos of the apartment before its renovation. As you can see, it was in decent condition. This was exactly 1 year after the wedding. And here are photos of the apartment after the renovation, another 6 months later." "How will you prove that this was done with the defendant's money?" "Firstly, in the period from September to April, when the renovation took place, the plaintiff was not working, and according to the bank statement, there was not the necessary amount of money in his personal account. Furthermore, the testimony of the foreman of the team that did the renovation is attached to the case. The contract was concluded in the defendant's name." The lawyers argued for a long time, calling witnesses and trying to prove their point of view. But soon the judge left to deliver the verdict. She returned with a large red folder. "All rise, court is in session," said the judge's assistant. The court ruled to grant the plaintiff's claim. The property of William Thompson will be divided between him and his wife. 1/3 of the apartment goes to the defendant, the car goes into joint use, and 50% of the money from the plaintiff's account becomes the property of Hope Davis. The court's decision has been made and is not subject to appeal. The gavel's strike resolved everything. William and Eleanor looked with malice and hatred at Hope, whom Nicholas was hugging. Tatiana, smiling broadly, joined them. "I told you we'd take everything from him," the girl said in a slightly strange, even obsessed voice. "It's rightfully yours, not his." Nicholas exhaled. "Understood? Now you and I have everything we dreamed of." The man smiled. "All that's left is to have a child, and the house will be full," Tatiana said, gathering her papers. "Well?" Hope drawled and looked at her stomach. Tatiana smiled. "Quickly indeed, will you make me the godmother?" "Do we have a choice?" Nicholas asked. "None." Hope smiled and hugged the two most precious people in her life again. Now everything would definitely be fine for her.